All right, I guess we can get started. So, for those of you who have been previously to one of our webinars, you know what the deal is about. Every single time we have a new challenge, one of the first webinars that we have is basically going through the data set and talking about it and showcasing some of the visuals that could be used for the particular data set. Now, these sessions are primarily here for you to have an opportunity to ask any questions. So if you have already started to work with the reports, with the data set, and you just kind of got stuck on something and want to, get some insights on specific way on how or approach and how to do this, or if you just have any additional questions, you can use these sessions for that. Don't forget also that you have the possibility to schedule a one-on-one session. And of course, you also have the opportunity to send us emails. So if there's anything that you get stuck on, I don't know, the login doesn't work for some reason, one of the charts just doesn't display, there's some errors showing up, you cannot figure out how to do this or that, just send a message to us. And you can send the emails to webinars@zoomcharts.com. So send us any of your questions. We're going to try to answer them as fast as possible based on a specific topic, let's say like that, whether it's the account, whether it's the visual. So a specific department is going to take care of that. What else? One quick thing, as always, as I want to quickly go through is, let me just share the screen, is don't forget about the challenge page itself, right? So I'm just going to copy and paste it in the chat as well. There we go. So in the challenge page, don't forget that if you want to participate in the ZoomCharts mini challenge, you need to register also on our website. When you're registering on our website, you're also going to get access to what we call a developer's license, meaning that you're going to have full access to all of our visuals without any cost, without any strings attached, right? You can use them for the demo purposes, and when you submit the report, we're going to send you an embedded link which has all the populated visuals with no licensing logos or anything like that. So that's the way it works. But you do have free access to all of these visuals. There's no money associated with it. Once you register, one other thing that's very important from the page is if you don't know where to get the data set, the actual data, right? If I sign in, for example, I'm just going to use my credentials. Give me a second. Sign in. Let's go back to the challenges. There we go. So right here, you can see two things. You can get the developer's license. If you don't have a developer's license, it's going to take you get developer's license. If you already have one, you can just see your license. It's going to tell you the login information that you need and the password. Now, one thing to remember, guys, when you first initiate this process, Microsoft is going to tell you that you need to change the password. So remember the password that you change it to. Yep. First time when you log in, that's going to be one of the requirements. And knowing Microsoft, another requirement that's going to show up is two-factor authenticator. You can skip it for, I think, 14 days, but after 14 days, it needs to be set up. That's the security requirement from Microsoft's side. And of course, once you have a report, you can submit it here. But what I was talking about is if you scroll down a bit more, right here, you can get the dataset. Now, once you download the dataset, there's going to be two things included into the folder. So in the folder, you're going to have the actual dataset, and you're going to have a cheat sheet. So the cheat sheet allows you to quickly understand what visuals can be replaced with what visuals. So let's say, for example, you're using category-based information and you have a clustered column chart, you can use a Combo Pro for that. If you're talking about date and time, for example, same clustered column chart you already utilize, but you're talking about date and time, well, it's better to use a timeline visual for that. So depending on that sort of information, that allows you to see, okay, what visual am I supposed to use in what scenario? If you still get stuck on something and cannot figure out, okay, can I replace this visual? Like I said, send us the emails to webinars@zoomcharts.com, and we're going to try to answer you as quickly as possible for those cases. So we have a question from An. I had a problem getting the drill down visuals license. How do I get it the right way? So the right way would be if you go to the challenge page, you sign up if you don't have an account. If you have an account, then go access your license here under See My License. Remember that these licenses are not the same as just a regular trial license, right? These are specifically created developer licenses where you don't have to worry about an expiration date, right? There are some limitations to it, but you have all the access to all the features and all the visuals. But if you have any issues on with the actual account and you cannot log in or the visuals are not working, please reach out to us and we'll try to figure out what's wrong there and how to fix this situation. There's no issue with that. Always make sure you communicate. Don't struggle in silence. Other than that, you can see the timeline here. You can read about the challenge overall, the whole, let's say, idea about the challenges and everything, how to participate, the rules and everything. You have also the brief. The brief tells you about specifically this section. What should the report include, right? You can still deviate from this and cover different topics, but this is a good way on how to understand what are we looking for from your reports. If you find a different dimension that you want to investigate, go for it. There's nothing in the rules that tells you that these are the only things you need to cover. No, if you find something interesting, if you want to enhance the data a little bit with something additional, you can do that to provide more context and then more interesting analysis. You're more than welcome to do that. These challenges are all about experimenting, learning new skills, and developing your current skills. So don't get too attached to just, for example, seeing these three questions. Oh, this is the only thing the report has to answer. No, you can enhance on this. You can add more questions. There are some even topics that we added here, like different KPIs and metrics you could follow. But if you think about something else, more than welcome. Trust me, guys, we're not going to take points away or something like that just because you thought about a different approach. No, we're more than happy to look at them to see how you started off with almost nothing and then created your report with a completely different approach. That's interesting. That's fun, always fun. So be free, be creative, and do the best one you can, right? If it's one of your first challenges, don't be afraid of, creating not the winning report for submission. That's fine. These challenges are all about learning. One thing that I can definitely recommend for newer participants, or even for older participants as well, is if you go to the challenge page actually, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see here previous challenges that have already, for example, closed. So for example, let's say we open up Onyx Data April challenge. You can see the winning report, and you can see all the other submissions that people have submitted. Look at these reports, take some inspiration. One thing that we do not recommend is don't copy paste it, right? It's not interesting. It also doesn't look good on you. So just take inspiration from these materials. Look at some of the visuals. Look at how they were customized, how they were approaching this or that scenario. Just basically getting more information from that. The good thing about these reports, why I'm saying to come here and look through them, is because you can also actually download the PBIX file. So you can look at the actual setup of the visual. It's not just an embedded visual or an embedded report. You can physically download the PBIX and look at the setup that the user has created. The other thing is, this is the reason why we ask for your LinkedIn accounts, because whoever is the winner, and for all submissions actually, you also get the name of the author and for their LinkedIn profile. So one thing that you can easily do as well is, hey, you look, for example, at Product Mesh's report and you see, hey, I really liked, for example, I don't know, this approach or the little gaps or, for example, the color mode. I don't know how to get the black tooltips or something. You can reach out to us. But another way on how you can do this is you have the LinkedIn profile for the author. Just send them a message. What's the worst thing that's going to happen, right? He's not going to answer? Well, okay, sure. I'm going to look for different resources. Never be afraid to ask questions. Because the worst thing that's going to happen is, well, somebody's not going to tell you. Well, you're in the same place that you were 5 minutes ago. You have to figure it out on your own, right? It's not the end of the day. So don't worry about it. Use all those resources. There's also Academy, just a bunch of different materials that you can utilize to get the most out of it. There's also YouTube videos, recordings from previous webinars. There's a lot. Let's just say like that. There's a lot of materials that you guys can use, right? They're all free without any charges. Whenever you want, you can use them, watch them, try to replicate or create wherever you have in your mind. I'd say the biggest advantage of going a creative approach on these challenges is just challenging yourself, right? If you know that you know already how to do one thing, don't just do it, rinse and repeat again and again and again. Try to go for something new that we haven't seen before. Okay, maybe we have seen it, but you haven't done it before. So try to develop your skills, right? Trust me, these little skills, these little knowledge points that you get from these challenges or different approaches is what helps you to get ahead of your competition, right? So never be afraid to just challenge yourself, try out new different things and see what else you can do with it. The main reason why I'm talking about this, why these challenges even exist, and why it's so important also for us to give the community a way for them to basically challenge themselves and increase their knowledge base, is because what we see nowadays is that the business analytics side of companies and business analytics in general is something that's getting more and more traction, right? There are researches which testify to the fact that, for example, 60 to 70% of all even enterprise level companies don't analyze their data, or even if they analyze it poorly. They have very basic reports, they have some KPIs to follow, but they have tremendous piles of information that they just do not look at whatsoever. They don't try to understand the correlation between it because, hey, 5 years ago, for example, nobody did it. My managers used it this way, so we're not looking for anything new. This is where you guys come in. You start to look at these reports, this data, and everything slightly differently. You bring the innovation into the companies. The amount of money that's being spent on business analysis in 2023 alone, it was over $29 billion, right? When you take it into respect, basically, when you take it in retrospect and look at the whole picture, when you're looking at, for example, creating a new report and somebody's asking for, I don't know, $50, $60 or something like that, or let's say some paid visuals are being used, it's just a drop of water into the whole ocean, right? So one of the things that I just want you to kind of get your mindset into is that you are one of the core gears in this whole process. Sure, you might not work for a large corporation right now. You don't work for a large organization, or you don't do data analysis whatsoever currently. That's not the problem. The main problem right now is for you guys to make sure that you're basically advancing your skills and you're going into the job market with knowledge and skills that even a lot of already senior level developers don't really have. Trust me, there's a lot of developers who have, for example, 10, 15 years of experience of data analytics, but the only thing that they've done is created Excel reports. Now, once you bring a Power BI report on top of it, you bring the interactions, you bring the drill downs, you bring basically the holistic view of everything, it's a completely different value. And that's what I want you to guys to understand, right? Power BI and data analysis is not just an umbrella. It's a way on how you present your data, the way on how you analyze it, and the way on how you tell the story. That's why these challenges is a good way for you how to basically look at different approaches and see, oh, okay, I'm looking at HR data, right? Everybody has the same data, for example, but it's being represented in completely different ways. That's the thing about it. I remember when I started off with data analysis, I had this narrow mindset that every single report is basically like a template, right? Sure, you can do that if you want to, but in reality, like if we even look at some of these reports, let's go for the same April challenge, for example, you can see that they are different. Sure, columns, lines, areas, the fact that they're similar chart types doesn't mean that they're looking at the same data or the same, kind of highlights or trends that they're looking for. There's a completely different approach in how things could be, utilized and looked at. That's one of the things when I started off, I sort of like religiously went through different challenges. I didn't participate myself, I'll be honest. I didn't have the guts. I was too scared of making the wrong report, choosing the wrong visual or anything like that. So I stayed away from it. But it was an inspiration source that helped me develop my skills to where I am right now. So just a little bit of off topic. Hope you guys don't mind it. I just think that it's kind of important for us to also talk about these sort of things. So you don't forget about the whole picture, right? That it's not just about these challenges. These challenges and yourself is just one stepping stone. It's one stepping stone in your career that allows you to get further away. The one thing that I'm looking forward to is just looking at all your amazing work once these challenges, kind of get a run in. So seeing the submissions, seeing how people advance from one challenge to another, it's what makes me go, right? It's the fun part for me. And of course, these webinars, they're pretty good as well. All right, you ready, guys, to look at the data set? Yep. So let's open up Power BI. And one thing that I'm going to quickly start off first is the Excel file that we give to you is going to have two pieces of information, basically. You're going to have the actual data table, and you're going to have a dictionary. Now remember, these dictionaries are here to help you understand how to read the data, or what does it actually represent. I'm probably not the only one who sometimes looks at the names of the columns or something and goes like, does this mean this or that? Or it could actually be also that, right? So these dictionaries or explanations for the columns and their names and the data types and so forth is very crucial and very helpful. So we give this to you as well. This just allows you to understand what is within the dataset. Ideally, probably you would have these for your reports as well, primarily just so you know what is what. If you're working with the dataset every single day, you know what the columns represent. I'm not arguing that. But what happens every single day is, think about a report that you have to come back to 2 or 3 months later. If you have this dictionary, it allows you and newer users to quickly understand what is what. So they don't have to go through the whole table and basically do this. Okay, so source is going to be how the tickets are coming in. Chat, email, phone. Okay, fine. Topics, not too long, shortened names. Okay. So that's what you probably would do, right? You can try to qualify the information, understand what it actually consists of. Like, for example, one thing that I noticed here is, for example, by default, this is going to be called created time. And also we have resolution time and closing time. In reality, this is date and time. Because if you're starting to, for example, separate the two properties, date and time, you can't really have created time twice, right? So this one's date and time. The other one could be created time, and so forth. So just make small adjustments whenever it's necessary as well. Now, if you look at the whole data set, one of the first things that I wanted to double check is this one. I wanted to understand if this data set particularly is basically a snapshot of the current status of the tickets, or is it something that's basically getting progressively increased with new entries? Meaning that, for example, a single ticket might have multiple entries with different statuses. The reason why this would be important for me is to understand, how am I going to build the report, right? Is it just a snapshot where I'm presenting current situation, or is it something that I can also utilize with different visuals and showcase the progression of a ticket? So let's say we received a ticket at 9 a.m. At 9:05, we had the first response, and so forth. Where now you understand how it progressed. In this case, so one of the first things that I did is I just went to the Power Query. You can do this in multiple ways. This is just how I did it. So I went to the Power Query. I found ticket ID, since that is our unique identifier. If you look at the dictionary, ticket ID, unique ticket number. So that's the unique identifier. Go back to the data, find ticket ID, click on it, and look at the statistics right here. So if you don't see these statistics, remember, top ribbon, view section, and you have right here column quality and column profile. These are the two things I usually encourage you to enable. Column quality is the first tier, I would say. It just gives you an understanding of the consistency of the values, whether they're valid, are they throwing out any errors, or are they empty. And column profile is what gives you more detailed analysis of the column itself. So what I've done here is look at the ticket ID. I also want to make sure that I double check if I don't have too many data rows. I want to check that column profiling is done on the entire data set. And what I can see here is that we have 2,330 entries. All of them are unique, meaning that this data set represents current status for all tickets. There is not going to be a single ticket that is going to be in two statuses at the same time. Now, this eases up some of the DAX calculations because I don't have to worry about, for example, taking the first entry, the last entry based on a date and so forth. So it eases up that part of it. What else I wanted to quickly check is, okay, what are the other dimensions that I have here? So I went with, okay, there's a ticket status, perfect. There's priority, high, low, medium, sources that we already looked at, different topics, okay, that could be utilized. Agents, okay, so we can already see, okay, there's probably some grouping here. We have agent groups, and different agents fall into different groups. So probably, more technical or more beginner-friendly questions are being asked. Then we have a lot of different timestamps. So we have a timestamp for created, expected SLA to resolve, first response time, like different timestamps for the ticketing. Now, the reason for this is because when it comes to support tickets, usually one of the most important metrics you want to try to figure out or try to follow is how long does it take your team to respond to the tickets. It doesn't necessarily mean that it gets resolved at the same time, but that is the initial response. You know how, for example, when you write to Microsoft, Google, or anything, when you submit a question, or even nowadays it's pretty common, just practice. Once you write a support ticket to somebody, first of all, you get the initial email back, hey, we received your ticket, currently it's being reviewed, we will update you once we have anything to update you with, right? We've all seen those. So that is the same approach. And that is one of the statistics that people like to follow as well, because there are basically two tiers to that. You want to understand how much time does it take for the initial response to go through, for example, and how much time did it take for an actual agent to get back to the support case. So there's a lot of different SLAs here. And one of the things that we did here to help you out a little bit is, instead of just providing the expected SLA resolvement times and created and closing dates and so forth, we actually already created columns for you to see whether this specific ticket is within the SLA or has it violated the SLA. You can do this by yourself as well. I would say do it like this, right? If you have a little bit of extra time, you don't have to do this, but I would just recommend, if you have a little bit of extra time, try to ignore these columns on first try, right? Just try to ignore them. Keep them in the backhand if it's needed, but try to create a DAX measure that allows you to get the same result. Just see if you can figure it out. It's one way on how I learn things as well. The reason why this is very useful when you have a column that you can reference things to, you can see whether your metrics, not your metrics, sorry, but your calculation is doing the right thing, right? If it's returning the correct result. Because here you have everything. Other cases, you might not have everything. So it's nice to just play around with different DAX measures and see, okay, how could I possibly do this? In this case, it's pretty simple. We have the created time, or we have even first response time and expected SLA. So basically what we're doing is we're comparing this date to this date. If this date is smaller than this, then it's within the SLA. If it exceeds or if it's missing, because if there is no first response, it also means that we're violating the SLA. The reason why I'm saying this is because if you look at the data, all the data is regarding 2023, right? So everything has already happened in the past. Nothing's going to happen more to it. It's a snapshot of an archive, basically. So if there is no first response, even if they respond right now, which is 2024, May 9th, yeah, they're probably violating the SLA. So if we have a value missing here, or if it's larger than the expected SLA, it's violating SLA, right? You can use, like I said, you can use the already pre-built columns if you want to. There's not going to be, any judgment on that. There's a reason why we gave these to you. But As a practice round, I recommend you to just play around with the DAX. Try to figure out if you can do this. How do you do this? If you get stuck on something, do not forget there's a bunch of different resources. There's YouTube. When I started out, there were just, you could count the YouTube channels basically on your fingers. Now there's a channel for everything. One for visual parts, one for that. There's hundreds for DAX. That I can assure you on. There's hundreds of different channels talking about DAX. So you can look through those, you can look through different blog posts and so forth. But yeah, try to do it yourself as well. If you don't want to, you can just ignore this and keep basically working with the data set that's given to you. Same goes for resolution time, closing time, similar approaches, right? So we then have a column for agent interactions. This just defines how many interactions have the agent done with the customer in order to get to the current status. So an interesting metric that we could look, for example, is how many interactions does it take for a ticket to get closed? Or what is the maximum amount of interactions for a single ticket that hasn't been closed yet? Like I said, these metrics that we have here. Let me just go back to the challenge page. There we go. So these are not the only things you can look at. You have the data. If you find something interesting, just go for it. Try to be creative, see what you can figure out, see what else you can take a look at. I'm always happy to see different approaches. Same goes for survey results. We can see that out of 2,300 plus tickets that we have, almost half of them is empty. Basically, it says 50%. It's close to it, yeah. So what is the average survey result? That's one thing. What's the average survey result for different other dimensions, right? Once we start to filter out things by status, by agent, by group, by topic, whatever it is, what type of tickets do not have a survey result? Is there some sort of correlation between the time of the day or the topic that's being discussed? There's a lot of different dimensions that you can look into. Product groups, pretty common stuff. Support level, tier 1, tier 2. I'm guessing this should be closely related to the agent groups, but it could also be different. For example, there might be a ticket that requires tier 2 to resolve, but initially was registered as tier 1 request. Countries, so there's geographical information as well. So you can look at where the tickets are coming from and see, for example, if there is a particular region that needs more attention. So let's say if the company is based in Europe, but most of the tickets are coming from US, and the closing time and everything for tickets in US is, falling behind, it means you have to figure something out. Whether you hire an on-site consultant in US, well, remote consultant, not on-site, sorry. Whether you get a consultant, whether you change your working schedules, but something needs to be done about this, right? You can't just leave your customers hanging. So there's a lot of different things you can look at. Now, once we go to the report itself, a couple of things that, first of all, when I looked at it, I wanted to quickly go through. So I saw that there's a lot of different dimensions that I can utilize. And one of the things that I wanted to do is to give the user an opportunity. You've seen this approach also in other reports. For those of you who are new, this is called field parameters. So there's a functionality in Power BI that allows you to basically create a slicer, sort of like pseudo buttons, that allows you to switch between different properties that are being used within the visuals. So what I'm doing here with this slicer, which is created through field parameters, I allow the user to say, hey, I want to look at the agent groups. I want to look at the priority, or support level, or status. Right? I'm keeping all the same visuals because this is just an overview. I would probably add some more KPI cards here. I just didn't do it yet. But KPI cards, the name for the report page, if you have some navigational, if you have more than one page, think about the navigation of the report. There's multiple ways on how you can do this stuff. Just look at it, see what you can do there. So But the reason why I wanted to do this is because I wanted to be able for the user to basically look at different dimensions. Because I could theoretically, right, I could just have a bunch of different visuals. Like I could have 3 or 4 donut charts going, each of them going for a different dimension. One goes for the agent group, one goes for priority, then support level, then status. And I can go mix and match and look at this. But the main question is that important for me right now? If it's not, the approach that I wanted to have here is a quick overview analysis. So for example, I just want to quickly see, based on a status, how many tickets do we have in total? That's why I would need a car. How is the overall distribution looking at? That's why I have the donut chart. You could argue and say that, hey, we're also seeing that on the timeline. I agree with you to a certain extent, because the timeline shows you the distribution over time. But the donut chart allows me to see the total distribution of tickets, right? Taking into account all the time units and all the time span. Same goes here for geographic and for different hour approaches. As for these two, the reason why I split them into 2 halves is because I wanted the user to have the ability to look at different things. And this goes back to what I said in the beginning, right? We had the created time. I called it created date and time because it's essentially talking about 2 components. We have date and we have time. I wanted to specifically split it into 2 different groups. I could add it all in a single visual and have basically a drill down where I could go through a single month, a single day, different time periods, and so forth. But that would also limit the information that I'm looking at, meaning that I would always limit myself to that particular month, to that particular date, or those particular hours. Here, since I split it, it allows me to do the following. It allows me to, for example, select a couple of months and see over these 3 months, how does the hourly distribution look like? For the hourly distribution, what I've done is I've created bins or groups of hours, because I could, of course, do this and just have 0 to 24. Well, in this case, 0 to 23, right? If it would be starting from 1, then it would go up to 24, because 2400 doesn't really exist, right? It's 0000. A lot of O's. But yeah, so this allows you to kind of look at 2 different approaches. If you see that this approach is good, but it's too, let's say detailed. There's too many columns. It's just kind of hard to read. I want to group them in higher groups of, let's say, 4, 6, 3, 2 hours, whatever it might be. You can very easily do that. The way you do that is you find your column for created hours. So for created hours, I just created a new DAX measure, which basically returns the hour based on the created time. That's first. That's how I got the hour component. Now, once you have the hour component, creating groups is very easy. You right-click on a column, and here you have the option of creating a new group. Click on it, you name it, and then you choose whether it's based on bins, which is basically like a bucket, or you do it based on a list. If you want to have more control, go with the list, because then you can define exactly what hour belongs to what group. If you go by bins, you're basically working with numbers all the time. And here I can say that, hey, I want to go with size of the bin, so size of the bucket. I see that the min is 0, max is 23, and I want to create groups with 6 hours in each and every one of them. Now, once I click OK, I'm gonna click cancel because I already did before. You can see it created a new column, and that column just has a grouped up version of the same values. So it goes from 0 to 6, from 6 to 12, from 12 to 18, from 18 to 24. Now, if I click on one of them individually, we have the drill down approach, of course. So let's say I can see that the highest number of tickets actually comes in midnight for us. So I open it up and I see, okay, what hours are most important? Once I do this, since I'm looking at these particular hours, for example, we can see at 2 a.m. a lot of tickets come in. I can see the timeline on a monthly basis. So when we have most of the tickets coming in at 2 a.m., what is the status for all of these tickets? Where are they coming from? And for this one, I would say it's probably pretty interesting because if we look at this segment, so we have 0 to 6, right? If we open it up, you can actually see that most of the tickets are coming from Europe. So I'm guessing not a lot of people want to sleep at night. It's one of the takeaways. But it is what it is, right? It's what the data tells you. And that's another thing about data and reading the data and showcasing it correctly. A lot of people or organizations, it's not that they don't know how to read the data, it's just that nobody really has visualized it. They have the data, they've had the data for years, but they're following the same principles, like I said, that have been used for X amount of years before. They have some sort of a basic report, they have some Excel sheet where they're covering their most important things. Having the ability to sort of slice and dice and cross-chart filter is what brings out a lot of details or, let's say, errors in the data quality itself. Because one of the first things you have to remember is the report is going to be as good as your data. If the data that's coming in is trash, the report is most likely going to be trash. You can't create an amazing report with trash data. You have to start off with the core mechanics. And a little bit above topic, right? Don't forget, guys, Sabina already just posted in. Don't forget to fill in this feedback forms. I know that nobody likes to do them. Trust me, I understand. I fully understand that. But it helps us to understand whether or not you like these webinars, whether or not they're helpful, what type of other topics do you want us to look at, discuss, and so forth. So whenever you have the time, whether it's during the webinar or I hope you can spare 2 or 3 minutes after the webinar, just go through the feedback form and let us know what you think about it. If you think it's great, tell us. If you think it's trash, tell us. We want to understand what is missing and how can we make this better. Thank you. Now, going back. Now, what I've done here as well is a few things actually I want to quickly cover. So let's say I create a timeline visual. Once I create a timeline visual, and since I know that all the data is only going to be regarding 2023, one of the first things that I noticed, which you have to tackle as well, is don't mind these namings. These are just based on local import language. These are in Latvian. So that's year, quarter, month, day. The value is going to be ticket count. There we go. This is the amazing chart that you get by default. Now, why this is happening is because we have a hierarchy of year, quarter, month, day. Right? What the chart does is by initial display unit, if we go to the formatting options, initial display unit, you can see that the initial display unit is top, meaning that the chart is going to start at the highest level of granularity that it has available. In our case, that's year. Since everything is in a single year, I think you guys can agree with me, this chart just looks perfect, right? It's so informative, so amazing. I wouldn't take anything away from it. Probably not, because it's just a massive blob. So one of the things that I recommend you to do here is, if you know that this, for example, report that you're building is something that's going to be used also later on. So for example, let's assume that that is my scenario as well in this case. I'm creating a report based on a data sample that the company has provided to me. They only given me an extract of 1 year, which is anonymized, randomized and so forth, but that is going to be the data structure that they're going to be using. I know that currently I just have a single year. Going forward, I might have multiple years. But if I present this to a company, I think it would have the same reaction like, why is there just a massive blob, right? So what I would do is, do not do this. Make sure you do not delete the units. If you delete the units, it means you get locked, you basically lock yourself out of these units. So what you do is you go to the formatting options, you go to the initial display unit, and then instead of having the default top selection here, you switch it to custom, and then you select the unit that you want to use for the initial display. Now, once you enable it, for example, I'm going to choose month in this case. And you can see that nothing really changes here on the visual. That is because this is the initial display unit. In order to trigger this, we need to do an initial load. So I can just simply switch between the pages, and you can see I'm now on a monthly basis. So this is how the user is going to start off. But because I didn't eliminate any of the subunits, they have the possibility of still zooming out, for example, and go to quarters or go to years. Sure, this doesn't look good, but the reason why I keep it here is because I know that this data set is going to have more years. I just want the demo to look good initially. If the user is going to tell me, hey, it's a great idea, but can we go for quarters, or can we actually switch it to years? Just know that you have that possibility, right? You can easily switch to one or the other or the third option. Well, it depends on how many units you have. Every single unit is going to have their own switch. And the great thing about the timeline visual is that if you actually go through the documentation, so let's go for resources, timeline. I'm going to post this in as well in the chat. So quick start, setting up fields, supported date and time hierarchy names. This is the one. I'm going to paste it in the chat so you have a reference for it later. There we go. So these are all the units that we currently support in the timeline. And as you can see, we support a lot of different custom type time and date units. So we can go down to milliseconds. We have different combinations of milliseconds, seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, and so forth. So the reason why this page is so important is because the naming of the columns needs to be exactly like one of the provided ones here, or one of the values in the list. Otherwise, it's not going to be recognized. I think I've shown this before, but just a quick example of this would be, let's say, if I create a column, which basically has year component in it. So I'm going to call it year with 2R. Basically like a pirate, right? So bring out the year from closing, close time. There we go. And if I remove current hierarchy and add the year, you can see that the chart is not populating anything, and it's saying, hey, there's a problematic field called year. Now, if I go back to the column name itself and just remove one of the R, the chart is going to be displaying. I don't have any additional levels of hierarchy. So if I go to display units, you can see where initial display units, I only have year. So the units that you have in the hierarchy also determines how the chart is going to work and showcase the information. So just make sure you pay attention to this. The other thing is that I noticed here and I wanted to quickly show is, let's say I'm going to be using the same visual. I'm going to be switching it to monthly view. There we go. Yeah, that's fine. And I'm going to be using a parameter as my legend. So the reason why I'm using a parameter is because, like I did in the overview page, I want to give the users an opportunity to basically switch between these and choose the dimension of splitting, right? So if I add a parameter directly into the legends field, this is what I'm getting. Nothing really seems to change. And if I look at the tooltip, you can see that instead of showing the individual agent groups, I'm actually just showing the name of agent group. If I switch to something else, it changes the color, but you can see it just shows you the name of the column. The reason why this is happening is because for some visuals, and this is not just for third-party visuals, this is also for native visuals sometimes. Sometimes what you have to do is go over the legend field where you added the parameter, click on the little arrow going downwards, and select this show values of selected field. Once you do that, you can see that instead of using the aggregate group, I'm basically using the individual values. So now I'm splitting them by status, and we have 4 different statuses: closed, in progress, open, and resolved, by different support levels, by different priority groups, by different agent groups. So I can switch between these, and it's going to recalculate everything based on what is needed. So just make sure that if you have a situation like this, where you just have a single column, no split, but it's sort of changing something, but nothing really changes. See if you have to do this. Sometimes it is the fix for one of the issues. The other thing is, do not forget about color coding, right? What I mean by this, if I go ahead and let's say go back to this page, right? I'm gonna make one here. Let's zoom out. Let's actually go ahead and add a reset button. So it's just a little bit easier for me to always get to the initial state. There we go. I'm gonna have a donut chart right here, which is also gonna have a parameter, have a ticket count. So if you have more than one visual using the same values or using the same split, make sure that you use the same color for both visuals. So in this case, for example, if I switch between them, you can see that this chart, for example, switches between different colors, whereas this one doesn't. If I go for a different something again, you can see this one switches, this one doesn't. Sometimes it is just a bug with the visuals. So one thing that I highly recommend to do when you're introducing the visuals and when you have a lot of different visual switches and so forth, refresh the page. Allow the visual to get a fresh load. And then just again, go through these and see, okay, the issue is still here. It's still persistent, right? So what do? You change the colors. It's not the end of the world. You go ahead and see, okay, first support is going to be darker blue. Second line is going to be turquoise. So it's going to be this and that. Perfect. Go to priority. High is red, low is purple, medium. Okay. Go back here, category colors. So starting from this one, this, and this. I think it's correct. Medium and low the other way around. Okay, fine. There we go. The reason for this is because color coding allows the user to read the information a lot faster. The one thing, though, that I do not recommend is to switch between different dimensions. Like, for example, here we have agent groups, priority, support level, and so forth, and keep the original values. Not the values, but keep the original colors. You could theoretically do that, right? So, for example, based on the color palette, my default colors would be yellow, orange, and red. There's different color palettes and stuff like that, but those would be the default ones, right? If I use the same color everywhere in the report, and in one case that represents the agent group, in another case it represents the status, and something else represents something else, you're just creating another way for the user to get confused. Associate a color with something specific. Of course, colors are not just important to highlight certain groups or something. Remember that there's also color coding from IBCS standard point of view, like an increase or decrease or somewhere in between. Typical traffic lights: red, green, yellow, right? What's good, what's bad, what's okay, or in between. So make sure you pay attention to your colors, because that also can break or make a report. If the report is good but the colors are all over the place, trust me, there's a high percentage of users who's going to tell you, it doesn't look good. Even though you're answering all the questions, you've done everything, but the colors are just off. For those of you who have been here before, you know already this story. For those of you who are new, I have an example that just comes from my personal experience, right? I created a report for our sales team. I took the data from CRM. I did everything they needed. I created every single KPI. They could slice and dice the information. They basically had a better version of what the CRM offered, right? I even double checked with the manager. Hey, does it answer all your questions? Yes, perfect. Give the report to them. And after a week or so, I wanted to check and see if they are using it, right? Because in Power BI services, you have the opportunity to see the usage of the report. And I open it up and I see that nobody basically is using it. There's like one or two agents using it. My thought process is, what the hell, guys, right? I just made you a report. You told me that it has everything, but you're not using it. Well, it turns out that they were very used to having a specific color for each individual product group. I didn't know that. So I just randomized the colors. I went with the color palette, I had the default colors, and it was so frustrating for them and so disturbing that they just went back to the old CRM report, because even though it didn't have all the information, they could read it. They knew what to look for. So I just fixed the colors. The fix took me like 2 or 3 minutes, right? And now they're using our report, everything's fine. But this is how I told you, right? It can break or make a report. Even the slightest things need to be taken into consideration. Never be afraid to also change. And one thing that I can tell you as a report developer, do not get attached to your reports. They're gonna change, new things are gonna come, users are gonna have new requests. You're gonna have to change them from time to time. Don't get too used to them. Not used to them, but too attached to them, right? If people want something different, you give them something different. That's fine. Trust me, the reports that I created, for example, even a year ago, when I look at it now, it's like, it's a little bit cringe. So you're learning new skills, Power BI is advancing, new capabilities are getting introduced. So things are changing naturally. You just have to adapt to it. All right. So we have a question. Please, are there two different submissions or competitions? I mean, the May challenge and the ZoomCharts challenge. Yeah, all of us. So there are two ways on how you can participate. You can participate in the Onyx Data competition itself. So that's when you submit through Onyx. And we do have a separate ZoomCharts mini challenge, which is part of the original challenge, but basically a sub-challenge. For this one, you have to register and use the guidelines from our website. I'm going to send you a link right now. Just give me a second. There you go. That's going to be the link to the challenge. So if you want to participate in the mini challenge and go for our prizes, then yeah, you have to participate here. But Onyx Data has their own separate challenge, the main challenge itself as well. So you can participate in one or both. Depends on you. We're not forcing you to do anything. You're more than welcome to do any of those. All right. Well, I hope that you guys filled in the feedback forms, or if not, then I hope you're gonna spare a minute or two, right? Yeah, of course you can also build one report and participate in both. That's not an issue. So what was I saying? Yeah. I hope the webinar session itself was insightful, that you actually managed to learn something new and it wasn't a waste of time. I hope that you're going to find a minute or two just to fill in the feedback forms so we can understand if there was something informative or if you think that was a complete waste of your time. Do let us know about both scenarios. We want to understand what's the real situation. I don't want to, have a feeling that no, it's good, everything's good, I learned everything, but then in reality, everybody is behind my back and saying, well, that was a waste of time. So I want to know how it is. But yeah, use the resources, make sure that you submit your reports as soon as you have something that you feel okay with, because we're going through those submissions and we're giving you also individual feedback on them. So you have enough time to actually improve on your version 1, call it like that. So yeah, if anything else, drop us a message, and I hope to see your submissions, and I'll see you in the top 5 announcement and the winner announcement, of course. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing rest of the day. Bye, everyone.